Hello, my name is Steve Kaufman. I've written a book titled The Nature of Reality, What We Really Are, and the Amazing Story of How We Got Here. And this is the fifth video in a series of videos I'm making that tells the same story I already told in the book. And the purpose of both the book and this series of videos is to provide you with the opportunity to become aware of the nature of reality so you can understand the absolutely wild and amazing situation that the reality that you really are has placed itself in so you can get yourself out of that situation because it's not a pleasant situation to be in. And that situation is that you have obscured from your awareness your own uncreated, timeless, deathless, and infinite reality as a result of mistaking what are only mind generated physical and mental appearances for being realities that are actually there, where those experiential realities, like reflections, projections, and rainbows, only appear to be, leaving your awareness effectively trapped within what is ultimately just a mind generated experiential dream, where you then suffer as you then go through life, quite often unknowingly and inadvertently placing yourself in opposition to your own hidden reality, while engaged in the futile and self defeating effort of searching for something that you intrinsically sense is missing in the mind generated appearances that are obscuring that which is not really missing but has only been hidden from you, i.e., your own reality. Like I said, it's a wild and amazing situation. And if the situation I just described makes no sense to you, that's probably because you have not watched the preceding videos in this series, because these are not standalone videos but need to be watched in sequence in order to be understood. Because although the concepts presented in these videos are relatively simple, they are concepts that, in order to be understood, require your mind to possess a conceptual context that, given the situation just described, your mind likely does not possess unless you have watched the preceding videos. Because for a concept to be understood, it needs a place to go. And if it has no place to go, meaning no compatible conceptual context into which it can be fit, then it can't possibly be understood, in which case it then appears to have no meaning, or, even worse, is misunderstood and given false meaning as a result of being distorted and twisted in some way so that it can be crammed into an incompatible conceptual context. And so I highly recommend that you watch the prior videos in this series before watching this one because we are not walking a well worn path here. Instead, we are cutting an entirely new path through the forest of mind generated physical and mental experiential appearances that you presently know as what is real and all that is real, so that your awareness can begin to see through that forest and into the uncreated real reality that is both actually there and what you really are, behind and beyond those ultimately unreal experiential appearances. And this new path is being cut by describing step by step exactly how the formless and uncreated awareness that is actually there, where physical reality appears to be, and which formless awareness is also what you really are, structurally evolved to the point where its ongoing structural evolution required the emergence of a structure that we refer to as a mind, in order to provide the individual awarenesses that flow through and animate fourth level structures with information regarding the structured environment they have to navigate while functioning as individual poles of awareness. And the information that minds provide are the created experiential appearances that we are aware of as physical and mental reality. And the purpose of that mind generated information is to provide our individual awarenesses with a sort of map that we can use to navigate the relationally structured environment that we must operate within for as long as we are flowing through and animating the fourth level relational structures that are actually there where we perceive and conceive our physical bodies to be. Because our physical bodies, just like the rest of physical reality, aren't realities that are actually there where they appear to be, but are just mind generated appearances that are being superimposed upon the relationally structured awareness that is actually there. But what we have done as individual awarenesses that are flowing through and animating fourth level relational structures is mistake the mind generated maps that these structures are able to produce for being the actual terrain, meaning we have mistaken what are only created physical and mental experiential appearances for being realities that are actually there. And by making that mistake, we have obscured from our individual awarenesses the uncreated reality that is both actually there and what we really are, behind and beyond those mind generated appearances. And that mistake and the reality obscuring and self obscuring situation it produces is causing our individual awarenesses to suffer Because even though the physical and mental information that our minds generate has allowed us to become somewhat adept at manipulating certain aspects of the relationally structured environment in which we are actually operating, thereby allowing us to make technological advances that have made organic life a bit easier, we are nonetheless still driving while completely blindfolded as a result of our inadvertent obscuring of the reality that is both actually there and what we really are from our individual awarenesses. As I said in the first video in this series, contrary to popular belief, we do not live in an age of scientific enlightenment where we have figured out most of reality and now just need to work out a few of the details. Instead, we are living in what is just a more technologically advanced version of the Dark Ages, where we continue to have no idea whatsoever of either the actual nature of reality or what we really are, and we are suffering as a result. Because all the human craziness, dysfunction, and psychological suffering you see in the world, both at the collective and individual level, is the result of individual awarenesses being provided with physical, mental, and emotional information in the complete absence of any awareness of the reality that is both actually there and what they really are. And so, in the absence of the context needed to make truly functional use of that information beyond the superficial material or physical level. It's like being put in a car that has all the modern informational features that make it easier to get to where you're going without running into stuff, but having all the windows completely blacked out so that you have no awareness whatsoever of what's actually out there, so that you still end up running into all kinds of stuff because the information you're being given by the car's informational devices, although relatively accurate, is also extremely limited, incomplete, and ultimately is not what's actually out there. And even though that is how human beings have been operating for at least all of recorded history, we don't have to keep operating in that dysfunctional way because we don't have to keep driving with our windows completely blacked out, meaning we don't have to keep obscuring from our collective and individual awarenesses the reality that's both actually there and what we really are. Because we don't have to keep believing that the physical and mental experiential information that our bodily vehicles are providing us with are realities that are actually there, where that experiential information, without question, does appear to be, and will continue to appear to be even once it is accurately known as it is, i.e., as a set of created appearances, rather than inaccurately known as it is now and as it is not, which is as a set of realities that are actually there. And so, the reason I'm taking the time out of my extremely busy schedule, do you mind? I'm trying to work here. Thank you. As I was saying, the reason I'm taking the time out of my somewhat busy schedule in order to provide you with the opportunity to become aware of both the nature of reality and the situation you are in is because understanding the nature of reality and the situation you are in is not just a pointless intellectual exercise, but is really a quality of life issue. Because whether you know it or not, if you are a human being living anywhere in the vicinity of the year 2025, which is when this video is being made, then it is almost certainly the case that you are inadvertently and effectively trapping your individual awareness in a mind generated experiential matrix as a result of doing nothing more than making the mistake of believing that the physical and mental experiential appearances that your mind is producing are realities that are actually there, because that mistaken belief turns those benign and useful appearances into reality obscuring and self obscuring delusions, and so into the walls of a cage in which your awareness inadvertently traps itself. And you then naturally act in the world solely on the basis of those delusional appearances, which then obligates your awareness to continue to create and enter into that now delusional mind generated reality or experiential matrix, which you then act upon, causing you to continue to create and enter into it. And on and on and on it goes, leaving us where we now find ourselves, which is living in a world filled with human beings who are running about frantically and desperately trying to find some relief from the psychological suffering they are inadvertently generating and experiencing as a result of being effectively trapped in a mind generated experiential cage or matrix. And while effectively trapped in a mind generated experiential cage or experiential matrix, we inadvertently generate and experience psychological suffering because, as explained in some detail in the last video, while effectively trapped in such a cage, We are driving while blindfolded because we are then operating in the world in complete unawareness of the fact that what is actually there, where the physical universe appears to be, is ourself. And what is actually there is ourself because what is actually there, behind and beyond the mind generated experiential matrix, is the non localized pole of our localized individuality. And that non localized and so universal pole of awareness is just as much our true self and nature as is the localized pole of awareness that, while flowing through and animating these bodies and minds, is aware of physical and mental reality. And as a result of our unawareness that what is actually out there is as much ourself as what is actually in here, we see other where there is only self. And that causes us to flow our localized individual pole of awareness unknowingly, inadvertently, and quite often in opposition to our non localized pole of awareness. And flowing our localized awareness in opposition to our non localized awareness is what produces the negative emotions that are the essence of what we refer to and experience as psychological suffering. That is the situation we are in. Now, when I say the situation we are in or the situation you are in, the we and you that I am referring to is not the mind generated idea of yourself that you, in all likelihood, mistakenly believe yourself to be, but is the you that you really are, behind and beyond that mind generated physical and mental surface appearance. And the you that you really are, behind and beyond any and all experiential surface appearances, is the formless awareness or consciousness that is aware of these words. And as I explained in the preceding videos, formless awareness is the real reality that is actually there where the ultimately unreal physical and mental realities only appear to be, because formless awareness is the reality out of which the entire universe is constructed and of which it is actually composed, beyond its physical surface appearance. And what I am in the process of demonstrating and making clear in this series of videos is that physical and mental reality are just mind-generated appearances that are real in the same way that reflections, projections, and rainbows are real. And the way in which reflections, projections, and rainbows are real is as unreal realities, which is to say, as realities that we can be aware of that, although they can present the appearance of being realities that are actually there, are never the reality that is actually there, because what all those unreal realities are just created appearances that are being superimposed upon the reality that is actually there. And physical and mental reality are ultimately unreal realities because what we are aware of as physical and mental reality are just appearances that are being created by our minds and then superimposed upon the real reality that is actually there, which then causes us to mistake those unreal realities for being real realities, i.e., for being realities that are actually there. And that mistake then causes the reality that is actually there, which is our own reality, to become and remain obscured from our awareness. Because as long as you mistake what is only a surface appearance for being the reality that is actually there, the reality that is actually there has no place to go in your awareness, causing you to become and remain either completely unaware of that reality or aware of it in a twisted and distorted way, and so still effectively unaware of it. And so, having said all that, here in a nutshell is the situation we are in. We are the ultimately formless and fundamental reality that is actually there where the physical universe appears to be. But we have obscured that formless and fundamental reality from our individual awarenesses as a result of mistakenly believing that the physical and mental appearances that are being produced by our minds are realities that are actually there. Because the experiential delusion that mistaken belief produces leaves no room in our awareness for the reality that is actually there, and so leaves no room in our awareness for an awareness of our own reality. And so, even though we are the infinite, uncreated, timeless, and deathless reality out of which the entire universe is constructed and of which it is actually composed, we go through our organic lives misidentifying with and so mistakenly knowing ourselves as being, and so effectively caged within, some relatively random set of mind generated physical and mental appearances that are no more real than reflections, projections, and rainbows. And as a result, instead of knowing ourselves as being the infinite, uncreated, timeless, and deathless reality that we really are, we instead know ourselves as being extremely limited and time bound realities that are born and die. And that ignorance of what we really are and the corresponding knowledge of ourselves as we are not causes us to suffer, as we then act in the world on the basis of what is only a delusion of self, and in so doing, quite often end up directing our individual awareness in opposition to our true and yet hidden reality and self. And I think that qualifies as wild and amazing, and also perhaps just a little bit fucked up. Although I have been assured by the non localized pole of my localized individuality that our situation is not some sort of punishment, but instead functions as a sort of semi intentional cocoon that our individual awarenesses weave around themselves in order to bring about some sort of individual and or collective metamorphosis that has something to do with the endless journey of the formless reality that we really are into ever increasing awareness of itself. But that's a story for another time. Here we are concerned with the nature of the experiential cocoon that we have woven around our individual awarenesses so that we can finally begin to free ourselves from that experiential cocoon and become directly aware of the formless, timeless, and deathless reality that both we and the universe really are. And toward that end, here I want to clarify what I mean when I say that physical and mental reality are not realities that are actually there, but are nonetheless continuously mistaken for being realities that are actually there. In my hand, I hold what appears to be a physical reality. If I were to ask someone what this physical reality is, they would say it is a rock. And if that person were a geologist, they would probably tell me exactly what kind of a rock it is, i.e., igneous, sedimentary, or metamorphic. And while such descriptions would be accurate at one level, i.e., at the superficial level of mind generated surface appearances, those descriptions would be completely inaccurate with regard to what is actually there beyond that superficial level of surface appearance. And that's because beyond the superficial level of mind generated surface appearances, what I am holding in my hand is neither a physical reality nor a rock of any sort, but is instead a relationally structured form of the formless reality that we refer to as awareness or consciousness. But we can't perceive that formless reality, whether structured or unstructured. Instead, all we can perceive is the physical appearance that each of our individual minds creates and then superimposes upon the relationally structured awareness that is actually there. But as human beings, our minds don't just superimpose a created physical appearance upon the structured awareness that's actually there, because as human beings, we have, through the use of language, developed the ability to superimpose the created mental appearances that we call words or concepts upon created physical appearances, so that we are then left with two layers of created appearances or unreal realities that our minds are continuously superimposing upon the relationally structured awareness or real reality that is actually there. And as a result, most human beings firmly believe that both of those created appearances are realities that are actually there, which is why most human beings would firmly believe that what I am holding in my hand is a physical reality and that that physical reality is a rock. And if that human being was a geologist, they wouldn't just firmly believe it's a rock, but would also firmly believe it's a certain type of rock. That is the nature of the experiential cocoon that we have woven around our individual awarenesses. And it is a cocoon that is composed of overlapping and intertwined physical and mental realities that we firmly believe are realities that are actually there. But it only functions as a cocoon or as an awareness cage because we mistakenly believe the mind generated experiential fibers of which it is composed to be realities that are actually there. Because it is that mistaken belief that causes those ultimately unreal experiential fibers to function as reality obscuring and so self obscuring delusions. And we are not here to unravel that cocoon, but to allow you to see through it, because you need that experiential cocoon in order to function in this world. But you need to be able to see through it and into the reality that is actually there in order to function truly functionally rather than dysfunctionally, which is to say, in a way that does not cause your individual awareness to unknowingly and inadvertently operate in a way that produces suffering for yourself and others. And the method I am using that should make it possible for you to see through that experiential cocoon is the method of explaining step by step in extreme and excruciating detail exactly how the formless awareness that is both actually there and what we really are goes about weaving that experiential cocoon around some individualized portion of itself. And in the last three videos, I explained in detail the first stage of that process. And that first stage involves formless awareness structurally evolving through a process of iterative and progressive self relation into the four different and inseparable levels of relational awareness structure that are actually there, where we perceive and conceive the physical realities of space, light, matter, and animated or living matter to be. And in this video, I'm going to begin the detailed description of the second stage of that experiential cocoon weaving process. And the second stage of that process involves awareness, once it is functioning as a fourth level of relational structure, continuing to undergo a process of iterative and progressive self-relation that results in structural differentiation and specialization at the fourth level of relational structure, and specifically results in the evolution and emergence of the specialized fourth level relational structure that functions as what we refer to as a mind. Because without a mind, there is no such thing as a physical or mental reality. Because our minds are just specialized fourth level relational awareness structures that, as a result of our individual and animating flow through those structures, are able to create the appearances or unreal realities that we, as the individual awarenesses that are flowing through and animating those mind structures, become aware of as our individual physical and mental realities. And so the purpose of this fifth video is to explain both why and how the specialized fourth level structure that we call the mind emerges within the structure of reality, as well as how that structure is able to produce the experiential appearances that the individual flow of awareness that is animating that structure becomes aware of as physical and mental reality. Now, when I say this video, what I really mean is 4 videos, which are titled Part 5A, B, C, and D, because there's a lot of ground to cover. And this particular video, i.e. Part 5A, deals with why fourth level structures needed to evolve a mind, and also with the general nature of the experiential situation in which our individual awarenesses find themselves as a result of flowing through and animating fourth level structures that have evolved a mind. Part 5B then explains how we use our minds to create physical reality. Part 5C explains how we use our minds to create mental reality. And Part 5D deals primarily with how our individual awarenesses end up effectively trapped in mind-generated experiential environments, and so effectively trapped in our minds as a result of mistaken concepts that we create regarding both the nature of the mind-generated physical and mental appearances and ourself. Like I said, there's a lot of ground to cover, and so let's begin. And as we begin, the first question we need to ask and answer is, why did fourth level relational structures evolve the specialized fourth level relational structure that we refer to as a mind? And as already mentioned, the reason fourth level relational structures evolved a mind is because at some point in their structural evolution, the individual awarenesses that were flowing through and animating those fourth level structures needed information regarding the relationally structured environment in which they were operating. More specifically, as fourth level relational structures began evolving into more challenging environments, the individual awarenesses that were flowing through and animating those fourth level structures needed information regarding the external environment that they could use to guide the fourth level structures they were animating, so that those structures could survive long enough to structurally reproduce in those new and more challenging structural environments. And here we need to step back a moment and understand that the relation of a localized individual awareness to the fourth level relational structure that it is flowing through and animating is analogous to the relation that human beings have with the cars that we drive. And in fact, that human beings invented vehicles that we individually enter into and then mechanically operate in order to get us to where we want to go is just another example of a fundamental pattern repeating itself at a higher order of iteration within the fractal structure of reality. Ultimately, the present-day scientific explanation regarding the evolution of both the universe and organic reality is that it's all just random physical stuff banging about and eventually just happening by pure chance to come together in a way that produces organic life, and then, at some point in the evolution of the physical brain, some other completely unknown and inexplicable physical randomness occurs that somehow produces a consciousness or awareness that then becomes aware of all the physical stuff. But hopefully by now you are beginning to realize that that version of events is complete and utter bullshit that has absolutely nothing to do with what has actually gone on and is going on to produce what we are aware of as the physical universe. Instead, the present day scientific version of events is just the explanation of reality that aligns with and so is derived from the mistaken belief that physical reality is the reality that is actually there. And so it's just a case of garbage in, garbage out. And more specifically, is just another example of what happens when you force physical facts, which individually cannot tell a lie, to conceptually conform to a mistaken belief regarding the nature of those facts so that then, taken together, they do tell a lie. And science will continue to turn out nothing but complete and utter garbage explanations regarding the nature of reality for as long as it continues to mistakenly believe that a reality that is no more real than a reflection, projection, or rainbow is the reality that's actually there, and so continues to obscure from its own awareness, and so from the awareness of humanity, the reality that is actually there, in which reality is the infinite awareness and intelligence that is not only causing everything to happen, but is also, beyond the physical surface appearance, the everything that is happening. Because everything around you, beyond the physical surface appearance, is structured awareness. And that awareness did not become structured randomly, but became structured through a process of iterative and progressive self relation that was driven by itself, which is to say, driven by the conscious intention of the zero level of reality or zero level of awareness. And these bodies, beyond their physical surface appearance, are structured forms of awareness, and they are being animated and driven by the same formless reality and intelligence that drove, through conscious intention, the structural evolution of awareness into the four levels of relational awareness structure that are actually there where we perceive the physical realities of space, light, matter, and animated matter to be. And so consciousness or awareness did not just poof into existence at some point in the completely random evolution of physical reality. On the contrary, consciousness or awareness has always been here because it's the reality that is actually there beyond the physical surface appearance. And so consciousness or awareness, either structured or unstructured, is all it really is. Because everything else we are aware of is just a created experiential appearance of one sort or another that is being sort of poofed into existence by some relation of awareness to itself, thereby making it possible for the reality that is actually there, i.e., awareness, to become aware of the appearances that it has through relation to itself, created within itself. And in the last video, I explained how emotional reality is poofed into existence as an experiential appearance through a relation of motion that awareness is able to form with itself once the zero level of reality is functioning as two poles of an indivisible awareness duality as a result of flowing through and animating what is then a fourth level relational structure. And in this video, I'm going to explain how physical and mental reality are poofed into existence as experiential appearances as the result of a transient structural relation that relationally structured awareness is able to form with itself when one of the relational structures involved in that transient structural relation is a mind or specialized fourth level relational structure that, as a fourth level structure, is being animated by the flow of an individual awareness through it, and that explanation will commence once I have established a bit more context. And context is needed because to truly understand the evolution of organic reality, so that you can understand why the evolution of a mind eventually became necessary, you need to understand that consciousness or awareness was always there, not just composing these structurally evolving fourth level relational structures, but also flowing through and animating those structures and thereby bringing them to what we call life. And at every step along the way in the structural evolution of fourth level relational structures or organic reality, that internal, individual, and animating flow of awareness was aware of reality from its internal, localized, and individual perspective, just as we, as individual poles of awareness, are aware of reality from our internal, localized, and individual perspectives. And through conscious intention, that internal, individual, and animating flow of awareness functions as both the driver of its fourth level vehicle and as the modifier of that vehicle when that vehicle replicates itself. And we call such organic modifications genetic mutations. And like everything else, science believes that such modifications or mutations occur randomly because physical randomness is pretty much the only answer science has for the emergence of just about everything as a result of its complete unawareness of the infinite awareness and intelligence that is actually there where seemingly random physical reality only appears to be. Consider a human being working to build some sort of structure and mechanism who, for some reason, has had a blanket placed over them so that anyone who comes along sees only the blanket and occasional movements in the blanket. And now consider that those who come along and see the blanket mistakenly believe the blanket to be the only reality that's actually there, so that they then have no awareness whatsoever that the blanket is just a surface covering that has been placed over a conscious entity that is working with a conscious intention to produce some sort of structure and mechanism. And as the structure and mechanism becomes larger, that structure and mechanism would begin to produce protrusions and movements in the blanket that the individuals passing by could perceive. And such individuals might notice certain patterns in the movements of the blanket that would allow them to make accurate predictions about those movements. And so the blanket itself would begin to appear to those individuals as a structure and mechanism. And so the question would naturally arise as to how an insentient blanket could arrange itself into a functioning structure and somewhat predictable mechanism. And because the individuals asking that question would know only the blanket, they would have no choice but to attribute the way the blanket seemed to have organized itself into a structure to some random process that was devoid of any conscious guidance. Not because there is no conscious guidance, but only because their mistaken belief in the nature of the blanket as being the only reality that's actually there would keep hidden from them the organizational force of conscious intention that is actually operating beneath the blanket to cause the blanket to appear as a structure and function as a mechanism. And that, in a somewhat large nutshell and by way of allegory, is why science had no choice but to come up with the line of infinite bullshit that maintains that the blanket of physical reality has become organized into material and organic realities as the result of what are ultimately random processes. Not because there is no force of conscious intention actually there guiding that perceived structural organization, but only because the mistaken way that science continues to view the nature of physical reality continues to cause physical reality to function as a reality obscuring and self obscuring blanket that is keeping hidden from its institutional awareness the conscious and so sentient nature of the reality that is actually there where the physical universe appears to be. We understand and recognize that this was molded into this form through conscious intention because we understand and recognize that this was molded into this particular form by a human being. And we also understand and recognize that human beings are conscious entities that are capable of operating with conscious intention. But we do not understand and so do not recognize that this was also molded into its form through conscious intention because we do not understand and so do not recognize that this was molded into its particular form by the awareness, consciousness, and intelligence that is actually there where the blanket of physical reality only appears to be. And as a result, science has had no choice but to take the mistaken position that physical reality has become structurally organized into various forms through completely random physical interactions and processes that are often likened to a room full of monkeys randomly and endlessly banging away on typewriters and eventually coming up with Hamlet. Not because that's what actually happened, but only because that is what must appear to have happened when all that is known is the blanket of physical reality that has been draped by our minds over the relationally structured awareness, consciousness, and intelligence that is actually there. Because ultimately, the same reality that, by flowing through and animating a human body and mind, and through the force of its conscious intention, made it possible for formless clay to become organized into this particular form, is the exact same reality that is actually there where the physical universe appears to be, organizing its formless self into relational structures through the force of its conscious intention. Ultimately, what I am saying is that these bodies did not evolve, differentiate, and structurally improve randomly any more than automobiles evolved and structurally improved randomly. Well, it sure is nice that automobile parts just sort of randomly fell together and eventually produced airbags and forward and rear collision sensors. That is clearly a ridiculous statement because those improvements were made as the result of a conscious intention to do two things: protect the structural integrity of the body that is driving the car, and provide the individual awareness that is animating the body that is driving the car with information regarding reality external to the car. And it is just as ridiculous to state that the evolution, differentiation, and structural improvements that have been taking place at the organic level are the result of random physical interactions, because those structural improvements took place for the same reason that cars have been structurally improved, which is as a result of a conscious intention to protect the structural integrity of the fourth level structure and to provide the individual awareness that is animating that fourth level structure with information regarding reality external to that structure. Put another way, to truly understand organic evolution and why organic reality evolved a mind structure, you need to recognize that consciousness or awareness was there, operating within organic reality as a localized and individual flow of awareness the moment organic reality came into being as a fourth level of relational structure. So you can understand that the evolutionary improvements that organic reality has undergone since it first came into being were not just about protecting organic structural integrity, but were also about providing the individual awarenesses that were flowing through and animating those organic structures with information they could use to more effectively guide those structures through conscious intention in a way that helped those structures survive long enough to reproduce. Again, everything is alive because everything is life. Organic reality is just a highly iterated and so highly structured form of the formless awareness and intelligence that is ultimately everywhere and everything. We call it life or the life force as it flows through and animates these bodies or any organic reality. But as I explained in the last video, what we conceive as the life force is the same reality out of which the entire universe is constructed and of which it is actually composed beyond its physical surface appearance. And so what we perceive and conceive as physical reality doesn't evolve as the result of random physical interactions, because physical reality isn't what's actually there. Instead, the awareness that is actually there structurally evolves as a result of that indivisible awareness forming relations with itself through the force of its own conscious intention. And so, the most fundamental force in the universe is not any physical force, but is the same force that allows you, as a localized and so individualized flow of awareness, to move your body from point A to point B, to form a thought or produce a positive or negative emotion. And that fundamental force is the force of conscious intention. And conscious intention is the most fundamental force in the universe because consciousness or awareness moving in relation to itself at the speed of light is what's actually there where any physical reality appears to be. And consciousness moves in relation to itself through the force of its own conscious intention. What that means is that the zero level of awareness is projecting itself into and so flowing through what you perceive as your body through the force of its conscious intention. And as a result, the zero level of reality has become dualized into an indivisible awareness duality that consists of the localized individual awareness that is flowing through and animating your body, and the non localized individual awareness that is everywhere else and everything else. But here's the wild thing. Once the zero level of awareness is functioning as an indivisible awareness duality as a result of flowing through and animating what is then a fourth level relational structure, the localized pole of that indivisible duality is not bound to direct its internal flow according to the conscious intention of the zero level of reality, and so is not bound to direct its internal flow according to the conscious intention of the other non localized pole of its indivisible duality, the conscious intention of which, for all intents and purposes, is identical to the conscious intention of the zero level of reality. And that's because any localized flow of awareness as an individual pole of awareness is free to operate according to its own individual conscious intention, and so is free to move with a conscious intention that either aligns with or opposes the conscious intention of its non localized individuality. And how do I know that individual poles of awareness are free to operate according to their own individual conscious intention? Because I am an individual pole of awareness and I am able to create and experience either positive or negative emotional realities, depending upon my internal attitude of either allowing or resistance with respect to what I am aware of as reality. Put another way, if individual poles of awareness were not free to operate according to their own individual conscious intention, there would be no such thing as a negative emotional reality, because all self relational movement would then be self aligned, at least in terms of conscious intention, in which case, then only positive emotional realities would exist. But because negative emotional realities do exist as experiential realities or experiential appearances, self oppositional movements of conscious intention must exist because self opposition is the particular relation of awareness to itself that produces those particular experiential appearances. And the only way a self oppositional movement of conscious intention can exist in the context of a singular and indivisible awareness is if the individual poles of that awareness, once awareness is functioning as an indivisible awareness duality, are free to operate with a conscious intention that is not identical to the conscious intention of the other individual pole of their indivisible awareness duality. And that conclusion leads to the question regarding why an individual pole of awareness that is flowing through and animating a fourth level structure would be free to operate with a conscious intention that is different than the conscious intention by which it is being caused to flow through and animate a fourth level structure. And the answer that comes back from my non localized individuality when I ask that question is as follows. When the totality, through conscious intention, gives birth to an individuality, the totality does not have the ability to control the conscious intention of that individuality because that individuality is ultimately the same reality as the totality, leaving individuals free to choose their own direction or mode of conscious intention, and which intrinsic freedom of choice we refer to as free will. Ultimately, the zero level of reality cannot control the conscious intention of the individualities that arise through its conscious intention any more than parents can control the conscious intention of their children. But here it's important to understand that the ability to freely choose a direction or mode of conscious intention, i.e., the exercise of free will, is not about choosing whether you will have the salad or the bowl of ice cream, or whether you will or will not cheat on your partner, or any other such mundane or surface level choice. Instead, the exercise of free will is only ever actually about choosing whether you will flow in alignment with or opposition to the other pole of your individuality, because all the mundane and surface level choices follow and flow naturally, and so are actually determined by that deeper and so real choice. And you are making that choice in every moment, whether you are aware of it or not, and most are not. That is, at the present time, most human beings are not aware of the relation of motion they are choosing to be in with the non localized pole of their individuality, because most human beings do not understand or recognize the immediate and in the moment informational feedback that emotional reality is giving them regarding what they are choosing in that moment as their direction of motion relative to the other pole of their individuality through the exercise of their individual conscious intention or free will. And that's because at the present time, most human beings are not using their conscious intention consciously and so are not exercising their free will freely, but are instead exercising their conscious intention or free will reactively and reflexively, and so unconsciously through automatic and so reflexive internal allowing and acceptance of the experientially wanted and automatic and so reflexive internal resistance and opposition to the experientially unwanted. And so you may possess free will or the ability to choose to flow your individual awareness in alignment with or opposition to the other pole of your individuality. But if all you ever do is internally allow the experientially wanted and internally oppose the experientially unwanted, then you are not making that choice at a conscious level and so are not making that choice freely, but are instead making that choice as an unconscious reaction in response to what you perceive and conceive as the wanted or unwanted nature of whatever physical and mental realities you are presently aware of. And that makes you an emotional slave of circumstances, because you then have no choice but to produce a negative emotional reality every time some experiential unwantedness appears in your awareness. Because regardless of whether you are exercising your free will freely or through unconscious reactivity, and by free will I am referring only to your ability to operate with a conscious intention that either aligns with or opposes the conscious intention of the other pole of your individuality, you have no choice but to become aware of the emotional result that choice is producing. Because that choice, whether made consciously or unconsciously, places your localized awareness in a relation of either self aligned or self oppositional motion with respect to your non localized self. And those relations of motion always produce a corresponding emotional reality, positive or negative, that your localized awareness has no choice but to become aware of. But that's not a bad thing and is really a very good thing because without emotional experience, we would, as individuals, have no way of knowing whether we were flowing in alignment with or opposition to our non localized self as we direct the flow of our individual awareness within these fourth level structures using our conscious intention or free will as we flow through and animate them. And we need that emotional information or emotional feedback because the fourth level structures we are flowing through and animating evolve to function optimally when our individual and so internal conscious intention aligns with the conscious intention of our non localized self or individuality. And I will now explain why that is in order to set the stage for the explanation of why emotional information alone was eventually insufficient, thereby providing the impetus for fourth level structures to evolve a mind that could provide the individual awarenesses that were animating them with information regarding external reality, as well as a way of responding to external reality based on that mind generated information. Because information alone regarding external reality without a way of responding to external reality based on the information would be of no use. As I said in the last video, it is likely that it is at what we physically perceive as the molecular level that third level relational structures became structurally complex enough to function as openings through which the zero level of reality could flow, thereby causing the zero level of reality to become individualized into an indivisible awareness duality that consists of the localized individual pole of awareness that is flowing through and animating what is then a fourth level relational structure, and a non localized individual pole of awareness that is flowing everywhere else and as everything else. And when fourth level structures first emerged into the relational structure of reality as animated molecules, which is to say, as complex third level relational structures that were able to be mechanically moved in some way by the flow of an individual awareness through them, external reality was not an issue, and so was not something that the individual and animating flow of awareness needed to be aware of. And external reality was not an issue because the environment in which fourth level structures first emerged had to be relatively stable and unchanging. Otherwise, those earliest and most primitive fourth level structures could not have survived, because initially those relatively complex and yet still relatively simple molecular structures had no way of responding to changing external conditions. Put another way, when fourth level structures first emerged into the relational structure of reality, the environment in which they emerged had to be womb like in nature, providing those earliest of fourth level structures with what they needed to survive as structures while not threatening their existence as structures. Instead, what was an issue when fourth level structures first emerged into the relational structure of reality was the internal maintenance of those fourth level structures in a way that would allow them to continue to function as fourth level structures, which is to say, in a way that would allow them to continue to function as openings through which the zero level of reality could continue to flow as an individual and animating flow of awareness. And so, what was needed when fourth level structures first emerged into the relational structure of reality was information that the individual and animating awarenesses could use to maintain the structural integrity of their individual fourth level structures in a way that would allow those structures to continue to function as openings that the zero level of reality could continue to flow through and animate. And that information was not provided by the mind, because at that point there was no structure that could function as a mind. At that point, there were only relatively complex molecules or third level structures that were able to function like a straw in a river and also like a water wheel in a river, which is to say, as structures that possessed an opening that awareness could flow through, and as structures that were in some way able to be mechanically moved or animated by that internal flow. And at that structurally primitive and molecular level, the primary function of the mechanical movement produced by the individual and animating flow of awareness was to maintain the opening in the fourth level structure so that awareness could continue to flow through it, so that that internal flow could continue to mechanically move or animate the fourth level structure in a way that allowed it to continue to function as an opening through which the zero level of awareness could flow. By way of analogy, the mechanical and so animating movement the individual flow of awareness produced in the earliest fourth level structures is analogous to what would be the case if one placed a water wheel in a river in order to mechanically drive the dredging of that same river, so that the river could continue to flow and turn the water wheel. Because fourth level structures can't reproduce or replicate themselves if they are no longer functioning as fourth level structures, which is to say, if they aren't still being animated by the flow of awareness through them and so aren't still alive. So, as important as replication or reproduction is in terms of the ongoing existence of fourth level relational structures, even more important is the maintenance of an individual fourth level structure as a fourth level structure so that it can eventually get around to replicating or reproducing itself. And that maintenance involves maintaining the internal structural integrity of the fourth level structure so that it can continue to function as an opening through which the zero level of reality can continue to flow. And that structural maintenance is performed as a result of the animating flow of awareness through the fourth level structure. And so it's performed as a result of the mechanical movement that animating flow produces within the fourth level structure. And so I use the analogy of a water wheel being mechanically moved by the flow of a river so that its mechanical movement can operate to keep the river open so that the river can keep flowing so that the wheel can keep turning, thereby keeping the river flowing, and on and on and on it goes until something breaks down, either by design or by accident. And to continue the water wheel and river analogy, in order for the water wheel to perform its mechanical function of dredging the river so that the river can keep flowing and so keep turning the water wheel would naturally be designed and constructed in such a way that it would perform its mechanical function optimally when turned by the flow of the river according to the direction that the river usually flows, which is downstream. And the same is true for fourth level relational structures. That is, fourth level relational structures evolve to perform the mechanical and internal dredging function optimally when the individual flow of awareness through them operates according to a conscious intention and so direction of internal flow that aligns with the conscious intention and so direction of flow of the zero level of reality or non localized pole of its individuality. But because individual awarenesses are not bound to the conscious intention of the zero level of reality or river of awareness, but instead have free will, which means they are free to direct their individual flow according to a conscious intention of their own choosing, as an individual awareness flows through and animates a fourth level structure, it can choose to operate with a conscious intention that either aligns with or opposes the conscious intention of the zero level of reality or non localized pole of its individuality. And what that means is that as an individual awareness flows through and animates a fourth level relational structure, it is able to operate with a conscious intention that either helps to maintain or does not help to maintain, and so degrades the fourth level structure it is flowing through and animating. And what that means is that an individual awareness is able to operate with a conscious intention that either helps to maintain or degrades its own individual flow through the fourth level structure it is flowing through and animating. And here I am going to once again assume that as an individual awareness flows through and animates a fourth level structure, that it is natural for such an awareness to want to operate with a conscious intention that helps to maintain that structure rather than degrade it. And I think that is a fair assumption because you don't get into a car because you want it to break down. Instead, you get into a car because you want it to take you somewhere, and so you naturally want it to keep running until you get there. But in order to operate a car in a way so that it gets you to where you want to go, you need to be able to see where you're going. Otherwise, you will just keep running into things until you eventually damage the car enough so that it stops working. And in an analogous way, in order for individual awarenesses to operate or animate the most primitive of fourth level structures in a way that keeps them functioning as fourth level structures, those awarenesses need a minimal amount of information because those awarenesses need to know whether their chosen direction of conscious intention in any given moment is being directed in a way that is helping to maintain the fourth level structures they are flowing through and animating, or is degrading those fourth level structures. And that minimal amount of information is provided by what an individual awareness becomes aware of as its emotional reality. Because what an individual awareness becomes aware of as its in the moment emotional reality is 100% a function of what that individual awareness is choosing in that moment as its direction of conscious intention relative to the conscious intention of its non localized individuality. Because whatever a localized individual awareness is choosing in any given moment or now as its direction of conscious intention places it in either a relation of aligned motion or a relation of oppositional motion with respect to the non localized pole of its individuality. And those opposite relations of motion produce opposite emotional realities, with relations of aligned motion producing positive, wanted, and so attractive emotional realities, and relations of oppositional motion producing negative, unwanted, and so repulsive emotional realities. And the beauty of this emotional informational feedback system is that the individual awareness that is flowing through and animating a fourth level structure does not have to know anything about the structure it is flowing through and animating in order to naturally choose to direct its internal flow according to a conscious intention that aligns with the conscious intention of its non localized self, so that its internal flow then optimizes the structure sustaining mechanical functions of that fourth level structure. Instead, all an individual awareness has to do is do what comes naturally, wishes to direct its internal flow according to a conscious intention that causes it to experience a positive, wanted, and so attractive emotional reality, which then causes the machinery of the fourth level structure, while animated by that aligned flow, to function optimally to maintain that structure as an opening through which the zero level of reality can continue to flow as an individual awareness that, as an individual awareness, has free will, meaning both the ability and obligation to choose in every moment or every now its own direction or mode of conscious intention. And it is because emotional experiential reality is the most fundamental and basic experiential information that we, as individual awarenesses, are aware of, is why emotional reality functions as such a fundamental experiential force. Everything we do in order to feel emotionally better, which is to say, in order to create a positive rather than negative emotional environment, or even just a less negative and so less unwanted emotional environment. Now, it doesn't always work and often has the opposite effect because we have no idea of what we really are or of the situation we are in, while we remain effectively trapped within mind generated experiential delusions that keep hidden from our individual awareness our own reality. But we never stop trying to find a way to feel emotionally better, even while operating from within our delusional realities. Because regardless of how deluded we are, and regardless of how structurally complicated our bodies have become, we remain individual awarenesses that are flowing through and animating fourth level relational awareness structures. And so, even though we are individual awarenesses that are flowing through and animating what are now very complicated fourth level relational structures that also possess a mind, our emotional situation is no different than it was for our molecular ancestors, which is to say, for the individual awarenesses that flow through and animated the earliest and most primitive of fourth level structures. Put another way, our fundamental guidance or motivation as we flow through and animate the highly evolved and very complex fourth level structures that we perceive and conceive as our physical bodies is the same experiential force that guided or motivated the individual awarenesses that flow through and animated the earliest and most primitive fourth level structures. And that fundamental experiential force is the natural desire to feel emotionally good and not feel emotionally bad, because positive emotions are naturally attractive, whereas negative emotions are naturally repulsive, because positive emotions are the experiential product of self aligned motion, and so are created through a relation that is like swimming with the current, whereas negative emotions are the experiential product of self oppositional motion, and so are created through a relation that is like swimming against the current. As I said in the last video, what I am doing is explaining why we experience what we experience as reality, not in terms of the physical and mental experiential realities that we mistakenly believe to be realities that are actually there, but in terms of the singular reality that is actually there and the relations that singular reality forms with itself. And the relation that awareness forms with itself as a result of flowing through and animating a fourth level relational structure creates an indivisible awareness duality and so creates an ongoing and persistent relation of motion between the direction of conscious intention of the two individualities that make up that indivisible awareness duality. What that means is that we, as the localized pole of awareness, have no choice but to either swim with or swim against in every moment the current of our larger non localized self, and so have no choice but to create and experience in each moment or now an attractive or repulsive emotional reality as the experiential product of that relation of motion. And that is why our primary motivation as we flow through and animate these bodies and minds is to always try to feel better, which is to say, to create and experience a more positive, wanted, and attractive emotional reality. Because we have no choice but to create and experience an emotional reality of one sort or another in each moment. Because we have no choice but to be in a relation of conscious intention, and so in a relation of conscious movement or motion with respect to our non localized self while functioning as an individual awareness that is flowing through and animating a mind and body. And it is natural that we want to create an attractive rather than repulsive emotional reality, or even just a more attractive or less repulsive emotional reality, i.e., an emotional reality that feels good rather than bad, or even just better or less bad. And what we are really doing when we direct our conscious intention in a way that creates a more attractive or less repulsive emotional reality is bringing our conscious intention into a greater alignment with the conscious intention of our non localized self. And the more aligned our conscious intention is with the conscious intention of our non localized self, the more effectively our individual flow animates the structure sustaining mechanical functions of the fourth level structure we are flowing through and animating. Because again, fourth level structures naturally evolve to mechanically function optimally according to the direction of flow of the river of awareness in which they emerge and arise as structures. Our bodily vehicles may have become much more complicated and now provide far more information to our individual awarenesses than they used to, thanks to the emergence and evolution of the mind and its ability to create physical and mental experiential information. But no matter how complex our bodily vehicles have become, and no matter how much additional mind generated physical and mental information we have become aware of, we remain individual awarenesses that are flowing through and animating what remain fourth level relational structures. And as individual awarenesses that are flowing through and animating fourth level relational structures, we have free will and so have no choice but to choose in each moment, either consciously or unconsciously, a direction of conscious intention that places us in either a relation of aligned or oppositional motion with respect to the conscious intention of our non localized individuality. And what that means is that we have no choice but to choose in each moment, either consciously or unconsciously, a direction of conscious intention that produces either a positive or negative emotional reality that we then have no choice but to become aware of. And at the present time, many human beings are effectively trapped in mind generated conceptual realities where they are habitually, chronically, and unconsciously choosing a direction of conscious intention that places them almost continuously in a relation of self opposition, leaving them aware almost continuously of one negative emotion after the other, with no positive emotion anywhere in sight, and so leaving them suffering almost continuously because you can only be in one of those opposite relations of motion with your non localized self in any moment, since, as opposite relations, they are mutually exclusive, meaning if you are in one relation, then you are, by definition, not in the opposite relation. And what that means is that if you are, for whatever reason, unconsciously choosing to operate with a conscious intention that places you in a relation of self opposition, which then creates a negative emotional reality, then you cannot possibly, in that same moment, either consciously or unconsciously, choose to be in the relation of self alignment necessary to create a positive emotional reality. And we can call that impossibility of simultaneous opposite emotional creation the emotional uncertainty principle, because it exists for the same reason that the physical uncertainty principle exists, which is because it is simply not possible for two realities to be simultaneously involved with each other in what are mutually exclusive relations. And what that means is that to operate with a conscious intention that creates a positive emotional reality, you first have to stop unconsciously operating with a conscious intention that is creating the negative emotional reality. And that is not easy to do while operating from within a delusional experiential reality where the reality that you really are remains completely obscured from your awareness, leaving you aware of what are only mind generated physical and mental appearances as being what is real, all that is real, and what you really are. Because while effectively trapped in our delusional realities, we tend to exercise or direct our free will, i.e., our individual ability to choose a direction of conscious intention, not consciously according to the emotional reality we are creating in that moment, but we instead tend to exercise or direct our free will unconsciously as a reflexive reaction of allowing a resistance toward the wanted or unwanted nature of what we are aware of in that moment as physical and or mental reality. And that is why, while effectively trapped in our mind generated delusional realities, it seems to us that our emotional reality is something that is created or occurs as a result of the wanted or unwanted nature of what we are aware of physically and mentally. But that is just not the case, and only seems to be the case because we are operating from within delusional realities that keep hidden from our individual awarenesses the central and determinative role that we ourselves, as individual awarenesses, are playing in the creation of what we are aware of as our emotional reality. How can we possibly understand and be aware of the role that the reality that we really are is playing in the creation of what we are aware of as our emotional reality when we are operating from within delusional realities that are keeping hidden from our individual awarenesses the reality that we really are? The answer is we can't. It's just not possible. And since we can't understand or see the role that we ourselves are playing in the creation of what we are aware of as our emotional reality, we instead then have to see our emotional reality as something that just happens to us or is imposed upon us as a result of the wanted or unwanted nature of external circumstances. And that way of viewing emotional reality makes us the emotional slaves of external circumstances, leaving us with no choice but to spend our lives running around trying to arrange external circumstances in a way that we hope and believe will cause us to feel emotionally better, never knowing that we have the innate ability to control how we emotionally feel regardless of external circumstances. Put another way, even though we may not be aware of how it is that we directly create what we experience as our emotional reality as a function of our internal attitude toward what we are experiencing as reality, we still operate in the world primarily according to the emotional reality that we want to create. It's just that because we mistakenly believe our emotional reality should be the result of external circumstances, we direct most of our emotional creation efforts toward arranging and trying to control external circumstances so that we can hopefully feel better at some point in the future, once those circumstances are the way we want them to externally be, regardless of how those efforts make us feel now. Instead of just paying attention to how we feel now and then adjusting our internal attitude toward what we are experiencing as reality in a way that causes us to feel better now. Long story short, in any case, long story somewhat shorter, the way that we, as an individual awareness, direct our conscious intention toward any experiential reality with an attitude of either allowing or resistance establishes our in the moment relation of conscious intention with respect to our non localized self. And that relation determines what we are aware of as our in the moment emotional reality. Because the reality that is actually there, where any physical or mental reality appears to be, is the non localized pole of our indivisible awareness duality. And so, if we only ever respond reflexively and so unconsciously with internal resistance to any experiential unwantedness when it arises, then we only ever create and become aware of a negative emotional reality anytime anything unwanted appears. And conversely, if we only ever respond reflexively and so unconsciously with internal allowing toward any experiential wantedness when it arises, then we only ever create and become aware of a positive emotional reality anytime anything wanted appears. And those consistent reflexive and unconscious reactions toward the wanted and unwanted nature of what we are aware of as experiential reality makes it seem like the way we feel is the result of external circumstances, and so makes it seem like the way to control how we feel is through controlling external circumstances, which is why so many people are control freaks, obsessed with controlling their external environment and the people around them, because that's what they delusionally believe they have to do in order to feel emotionally better, never knowing that there is another, more direct, more predictable, and so more effective way to control the quality of what they become aware of as their emotional reality. And that more direct, more predictable, and so more effective way to control the quality of what we become aware of as our emotional reality is to take conscious control of how we direct our conscious intention toward what we are aware of as any experiential reality by consciously choosing to allow and accept reality as it is in this moment, regardless of its wanted or unwanted appearance, instead of directing our conscious intention toward what we are aware of as experiential reality as a reflexive and so unconscious reaction of allowing or resistance in response to the wanted or unwanted appearance of that reality. Because the wanted or unwanted appearance of any experiential reality is just that, i.e., an appearance and not the reality that is actually there. It is a rope that appears as a snake, or put more directly, it is formless awareness that is having some experiential appearance superimposed upon it. And so our internal attitude of allowing a resistance toward what experientially appears to be there is actually an internal attitude of allowing a resistance toward the awareness that is actually there. And that internal attitude of allowing a resistance toward the awareness that is actually there establishes our in the moment relation of conscious intention with respect to the non localized pole of our indivisible awareness duality. And that relation of conscious intention and that relation alone determines what we, as the localized pole of that indivisible awareness duality, become aware of as our in the moment emotional reality. Again, what we experience as reality, physical, mental, and emotional, is not a function of interactions that take place between realities that are only appearances. Realities that are only appearances can't actually do anything other than appear to be there. The only reality that can actually do or create anything, and the only reality that ever actually does or creates anything, is the reality that is actually there. And that reality is formless awareness, either unstructured or relationally structured. And so, what we experience as physical, mental, and emotional reality is always a function of some interaction or relation that is taking place between different aspects or forms of the singular and formless reality that is both actually there and what we really are, beyond the mind generated physical and mental appearances that only appear to actually be there. And that singular and formless reality only ever is now, and so all experience producing relations can only ever take place now. What that means is that whatever you are experiencing in this moment as a physical, mental, or emotional reality can only exist as a function of a relation in which you are involved with awareness that is taking place now, and is not and cannot be a function of a relation in which you were involved in the past or will be involved in the future, because past and future are both just mind generated conceptual appearances that have no actual or substantial reality whatsoever, and so do not exist as existential places or spaces in which anything can actually happen or be created. All events, happenings, relations, and creations only ever take place in the space of now, because now is the real reality, i.e., the reality that is actually there, whereas past and future are unreal realities, i.e., realities that are just created appearance that arise in and are known by the formless awareness that only ever is now and ultimately is itself the now. Put another way, formless awareness and the space of now are not two different realities, but are just two different verbal ways of pointing toward the same ultimately inconceivable fundamental reality. Formless awareness is the space of now, and the space we refer to as the now is formless awareness. And that fundamental reality can form relations with itself, and a very tiny subset of those relations produce experiential appearances that arise in, exist in, and so are known by the formless awareness or space of now in which they arise and exist. And as individual awarenesses, we have no choice but to become aware of whatever experiential appearances our individual flow is being used to create. But as individual awarenesses, we do have a choice with regard to how we become aware of the experiential appearances we are helping to create, because we can be aware of those created appearances in two different ways, as they actually are or as they are not. Specifically, we can become aware of them as they actually are, which is as created appearances, or we can become aware of them as they are not, which is as realities that are actually there, and so as realities that seem to be more than just appearances. And if we become aware of experiential appearances as they actually are, then we are able to be simultaneously aware of both the created appearances and the reality that is actually there, where those appearances appear to be, in the same way that we can be simultaneously aware of a reflection and the mirror in which it arises and exists. On the other hand, if we, for whatever reason, become mistakenly aware of experiential appearances as they are not, by becoming aware of them as being realities that are actually there, then we are not able to be simultaneously aware of both the created appearances and the reality that is actually there, but are instead only able to be aware of the experiential appearances, in the same way that we are unable to become aware of a mirror for as long as we continue to mistakenly believe the reflection that arises and exists within it is the reality that is actually there. That is how simple our situation ultimately is. We are an ocean of infinite and indivisible awareness, and we have made the mistake of believing that appearances that we are creating within ourselves are realities that are actually there, and in so doing, have rendered ourselves unable to become simultaneously aware of both the created appearances and the reality that is actually there, thereby obscuring from our awareness our own reality, which then leaves us aware of only the created appearances, and so leaves our infinite and indivisible awareness effectively trapped within unreal realities that are composed of and bounded by experiential appearances that we are ourselves both creating and conscious of. That's it. That's the situation that the reality that we really are has placed itself in. But the self obscuring and effective entrapment that I just described does not happen to the whole ocean of awareness, but only happens to the individual portions of that ocean that are flowing through and animating structured forms of itself that are capable of producing experiential appearances that, once created, can then be mistaken for being realities that are actually there. And as human beings, we are individual portions of the ocean of infinite awareness that are flowing through and animating structured forms of awareness that are capable of producing a dazzling array of physical and mental experiential appearances that we have mistaken for being realities that are both actually there and what we really are, thereby rendering our individual awarenesses unable to become aware of the reality that is both actually there and what we really are. And here's the irony of the situation we are in. Fourth level relational structures evolved minds in order to provide the individual awarenesses that were flowing through and animating those structures with additional information, beyond emotional information, that those individual awarenesses could use to better navigate the more challenging environments in which they had to operate, once fourth level structures began to drift out of and so ventured beyond their original womb like environment. But what has happened, owing to our mistaken belief regarding the nature of the physical and mental information that our minds are able to produce, is that that physical and mental information, while providing us with additional information, is also functioning as a blindfold that is keeping hidden from our individual awarenesses our own reality. And so, even though we now have all this additional physical and mental information that has allowed us to learn to predictably manipulate certain very limited aspects of relationally structured reality and thereby improve the quality of our lives through technology, we have now also become emotional wrecks because we are now driving these structures while completely unaware of the reality that we need to be at least somewhat aware of in order to consciously direct our conscious intention and so exercise our free will freely, so that we can consciously and consistently create the type of emotional reality that we naturally want to become aware of, instead of creating our emotional realities inconsistently through unconscious reactivity. In our present situation, we are like someone driving a car who tries to navigate using only the additional and secondary information being provided on the dashboard, while completely ignoring the primary information that comes from just looking out the windshield, so that they end up getting into wrecks quite often, leaving them wondering why driving has to be so hard and painful. And likewise, in terms of how we navigate reality, we believe physical and mental information to be more important than emotional information because, for the most part, we do not even recognize emotional reality as information, but instead see it as something that just happens to us. And as a result, we drive these bodily vehicles and navigate relationally structured reality guided primarily by physical and mental information, and for the most part, we ignore the primary navigational guidance that continues to be continuously provided by emotional reality, so that we end up feeling quite bad quite often, leaving us wondering why life has to be so hard and full of suffering. What I'm saying is that mind generated physical and mental information was never meant to be our primary navigational information. But physical and mental information has nonetheless become our primary navigational information as a result of our mistaken belief regarding the nature of that information, because that mistaken belief renders emotional information unintelligible by causing physical and mental reality to function as a delusion that obscures from our individual awarenesses our own reality, thereby causing emotional experience to appear as something that just happens to us as a function of physical and mental reality, instead of appearing as it actually is, which is as a reality that we create as a function of how we are choosing to direct our conscious intention toward whatever it is that we are aware of as reality. Put another way, physical and mental information is only supposed to be supplemental to the primary guidance that emotional information continues to provide us with. That's why trying to feel better remains our primary motivation. Our mistake is not in wanting to feel emotionally better. Our mistake is only in the indirect, inefficient, and externally dependent way that we try to get there while driving blindfolded by physical and mental realities that we have, through mistaken belief in their nature, inadvertently converted into self obscuring delusions. And I know this is not something that people who are in the midst of some horrible situation that seems to be the cause of an enormous amount of emotional unwantedness want to hear. But it is simply the case that what we are aware of as our emotional reality is 100% a function of how we are choosing, either consciously or unconsciously, to direct our conscious intention toward whatever reality we are aware of as being actually there, which can be either some experiential reality or the formless reality that is actually there. And regardless of what we believe is actually there, What's actually there, where any experiential reality appears to be, is the other pole of our individuality, and it is our in the moment relation of conscious intention with that real reality as either self aligned or self oppositional that creates our in the moment emotional reality. And the only way to internally accept the experientially unwanted instead of just reactively opposing it is to have some awareness of the reality that we really are, because it is simply not possible to accept and allow the unwanted while operating fully from within the experiential delusion, because from within that delusion, the unwanted appears completely unacceptable. And the experientially unwanted appears completely unacceptable while operating from within the experiential delusion, because from within that delusion, the experientially unwanted also appears as a reality that in some way diminishes whatever set of experiential realities we end up mistakenly believing ourselves to be while operating from within that delusion. Outside the experiential delusion, experiential reality still appears wanted and unwanted, but it is only from within the experiential delusion that wanted and unwanted experiential realities appear to enhance and diminish, respectively, what one mistakenly believes themselves to be, thereby leading to automatic and unconscious responses to those realities based on their wanted or unwanted appearance. What happens is that, while operating from within a mind generated delusion of self, any experiential reality that is conceived to diminish what we mistakenly believe ourselves to be automatically gets mentally labeled as bad. And once we have applied that label to any experiential reality, we then have no choice but to internally oppose that reality, because it then appears to exist in a way that makes it completely unacceptable. Because it is just not possible, while operating from within a delusion of self, to direct your conscious intention with an attitude of allowing our acceptance toward any experiential reality that is being actively defined as, and so must be seen as, a reality that in some way diminishes what you mistakenly believe yourself to be. Put another way, while operating from within the experiential delusion, and so from within a delusional idea of self, if you see any experiential reality as in some way diminishing the set of experiential realities that you mistakenly believe yourself to be, you are going to mentally label that reality as bad, and you are then going to direct your conscious intention toward that experiential reality with an attitude of resistance and opposition. And in so doing, you will be directing your conscious intention in a way that opposes the conscious intention of your non localized self. And as a result, you will create and become conscious of a negative emotional reality. On the other hand, if you see any experiential reality as in some way enhancing the set of experiential realities that you mistakenly believe yourself to be, you are going to mentally label that reality as good, and you are then going to direct your conscious intention toward that experiential reality with an attitude of allowing and acceptance. And in so doing, you will be directing your conscious intention in a way that aligns with the conscious intention of your non localized self. And as a result, you will create and become conscious of a positive emotional reality. That is unconscious reactivity. And as just described, unconscious reactivity is the exercise of our free will or conscious intention, not according to the emotional reality we want to create, but according to the mental labels of good and bad that we automatically apply to most of the experiential realities that we become aware of, and which mental labels we unconsciously and automatically apply based on whether or not those experiential realities are conceived to enhance or diminish our experiential identity or delusional idea of self. And in that way, rather than exercising our conscious intention or free will consciously and freely in order to create the type of emotional reality we want to create, we instead exercise our conscious intention or free will automatically and so unconsciously and so unfreely, according to the mental label of good or bad that we have applied to that experiential reality, so that we end up creating our emotional realities unconsciously as a combined function of the experiences that happen to arise in our awareness and how we mentally label or judge those experiences based on how they are conceived to affect our experiential identity. And so, when you operate in the world from within the experiential delusion, it may seem that you are exercising your free will freely as you respond to experiential reality, but you are not. Because what is actually happening is that you are using your mind to automatically apply the mental labels of good and bad to experiential realities based upon whether those realities are conceived to either enhance or diminish what you delusionally believe yourself to be. And once those mental labels have been applied to any experiential reality, those realities then appear to actually be either good or bad. And you then direct your conscious intention toward them, not freely or consciously, but as an automatic and so unconscious response according to how they have been labeled, internally allowing the good and internally resisting the bad, with the former response creating a positive emotion and the latter response creating a negative emotion for reasons that have been previously described. And those previously described reasons have to do with the relation of either self aligned or self oppositional motion that must always exist between the localized and non localized poles of your indivisible awareness duality. And whether that relation is one of self aligned or self oppositional motion is determined by the way in which you, as the localized pole of awareness, exercise your conscious intention, since the conscious intention of your non localized pole of awareness is constant. And the conscious intention of your non localized pole of awareness is constant because the conscious intention of that pole of awareness is one of complete allowing acceptance of its localized pole, i.e., you, because it is continuously aware of your localized flow of awareness as being an indivisible aspect of itself. Because unlike you, it is not caught up in an experiential delusion that is keeping its own reality hidden from itself. In any case, while operating from within the experiential delusion, our free will is not free at all, but is bound to and caught up in a net that is constructed of what happens and what we delusionally believe ourselves to be. Because from within the experiential delusion, we exercise our conscious intention automatically and so unconsciously, according to how what happens is conceived to affect what we delusionally believe ourselves to be, regardless of the emotion created. Instead of exercising our conscious intention in the way that it is supposed to be exercised, which is as a conscious choice to direct our awareness toward what we are aware of as reality in a way that creates a more wanted rather than less wanted emotional reality. But you can only exercise your conscious intention consciously and so freely, and thereby consciously create a more wanted rather than less wanted emotional reality, regardless of what is happening, in moments when you have some direct awareness of the reality that you really are, meaning in moments when your individual awareness is no longer trapped fully and completely within the experiential delusion. And that's why, in the final analysis, it all comes down to whether we, in any given moment, are operating in this world in awareness of and so on the basis of what we really are, or in awareness of and so on the basis of what we delusionally believe ourselves to be. Put another way, it all comes down to whether we, in any moment, are operating while misidentified with experiential forms or operating while accurately identified with the formless reality that we really are. There is no middle ground. In every moment, you are directing your conscious intention toward what you are aware of as reality, either consciously, on the basis of what you really are, or unconsciously, on the basis of experiential realities that you mistakenly believe to be both what is actually there and what you really are. And the first way leads to increasing self awareness and a decrease in suffering, while the second way keeps your localized awareness effectively trapped in an experiential delusion, where you cause yourself to suffer, as you then quite often end up unknowingly and inadvertently directing your conscious intention in opposition to the conscious intention of your completely obscured, non localized awareness. And that's why, in order to free ourselves from unconscious reactivity, we first need to free ourselves to some degree from the experiential delusion so that we can become to some degree aware of the reality that we really are, so we can identify with that real reality instead of with what are only unreal appearances. Because it is only while aware of and identified to some degree with the reality that we really are that it becomes possible to exercise our conscious intention consciously and so freely. Because only then are we free to direct our awareness toward what we are aware of as reality in a way that places us in a relation of self alignment and so creates the type of emotional reality that we naturally want to create, regardless of the wanted or unwanted nature of what appears to be experientially happening. Here's how the experiential system works. This drawing depicts the natural relation that exists between the conscious intention of the localized and non-localized poles of the indivisible awareness duality that we are operating as a result of flowing through and animating a fourth level relational structure, and the natural relation that exists between the conscious intention of the localized and non-localized poles of our individuality is one of self-aligned movement because, absent delusion, it is in our nature to direct our localized awareness in a way that aligns with the conscious intention of our non localized self, simply because it feels good to do so and feels bad not to do so. And it feels good to do so and feels bad not to do so because the relation of either self aligned or self oppositional conscious intention that must exist between the localized and non localized poles of our indivisible awareness duality produces an experiential appearance that we, as the localized individuality, become aware of as either a positive or negative emotional reality. And because all experiential realities are appearances that are created as a result of some relation that awareness forms with itself while functioning as an indivisible awareness duality, analogous to the line that arises where the tips of two fingers meet, experiential reality in general, and emotional reality in particular, is depicted in this drawing as an appearance that arises and exists between the localized and non localized poles of our indivisible awareness duality. And owing to where experiential realities are positioned, which is between our localized and non localized individualities, experiential realities are able to function as either a transparent lens that allows a localized awareness to be simultaneously aware of both experiential reality and its non localized reality, or as a non transparent lens that prevents a localized awareness from being simultaneously aware of both experiential reality and its non localized reality, leaving it aware of only experiential reality, in which case then the experiential lens is no longer functioning as a lens, but is instead functioning as a wall. Now, when fourth level structures first emerged within the structure of reality, the only experiential reality was emotional reality. And so at that point, the experiential lens consisted of only emotional reality. An emotional reality by itself cannot function as a non transparent lens or wall that obscures awareness from itself, because for experiential reality to function as a non transparent lens or wall, it first has to be converted into a delusion through mistaken belief in its nature. And absent a mind, there is nothing that can produce the conceptual realities that we refer to as beliefs, mistaken or otherwise. And so, localized awarenesses that are flowing through and animating fourth level structures that do not possess a mind are able to easily and consistently maintain a direction of conscious intention that aligns with the conscious intention of their non localized pole, which then optimizes these structures sustaining mechanical functions that internal flow of awareness produces. Because all such awarenesses have to do is direct their localized awareness toward what they are aware of as reality in a way that feels emotionally better rather than emotionally worse. And that's easy to do consistently when the experiential lens remains transparent so that the localized awareness remains aware of the other pole of its individuality while aware of the created experiential realities. But that becomes impossible to do consistently when the experiential lens begins to function as an experiential wall so that the only realities the localized awareness remains aware of are the created experiential realities. Because once the experiential lens begins to function as an experiential wall, it then becomes natural for us to either occasionally or quite often do the unnatural and direct the conscious intention of our localized awareness in opposition to the conscious intention of our non localized awareness, which then causes us to feel emotionally worse rather than emotionally better. And in order to understand how that happens and why that is, we need to jump ahead a few billion years to where we are now. And where we are now is functioning as individual awarenesses that are flowing through and animating fourth level structures that also possess very highly evolved minds that are capable of producing a vast array of physical and mental experiential information to supplement the emotional information that does not require a mind in order to be created. And that experiential system looks like this. And as you can see, it's the same basic experiential system and setup, but with the addition of the two experiential realities that are produced by the mind, i.e., physical and mental reality. And so, in this new and more structurally evolved situation, the experiential lens now consists of the three different experiential appearances that we refer to as emotional, mental, and physical reality instead of just emotional reality. And in this drawing, the placement or sequence of the three different experiential realities is not arbitrary, but depicts the way that we, from our localized perspective, become aware of those three different experiential realities. Specifically, emotional reality is depicted on the left because it remains our primary experiential information regarding how to best and most functionally direct our individual awareness while flowing through and animating a structured form of our own reality. Mental and physical reality, on the other hand, are depicted to the right of emotional reality, or behind the emotional lens, relative to the localized pole of awareness. Because mental and physical reality are secondary or supplemental forms of experiential information that are supposed to help us fine tune our emotionally chosen and so self aligned direction of awareness in response to specific experiential circumstances. Put another way, all physical and mental information is viewed through the lens of emotion, and that is why emotion colors everything, which is why if you are feeling emotionally good, everything appears brighter and better, and if you are feeling emotionally bad, everything appears darker and worse. And in this drawing, mental experience is depicted as an experiential lens that sits to the left of the physical lens because, as I will explain in more detail in the other three parts of this fifth video in the series, mental reality exists as a mostly unconscious overlay that is superimposed upon physical reality in order to guide our specific responses to physically perceived reality while we are still being guided more generally and primarily by our emotional reality. For example, something happens in physical reality and conceptual reality shows us that we can deal with it in two different ways, one of which feels better when we consider it, and the other of which feels worse when we consider it. And then we naturally choose to deal with the physical happening in a way that feels emotionally better, guided in the specific response by mental and physical information, while still being guided primarily by emotional information. At least that's how the experiential system is supposed to work, and that's how it does work up to the point where the human mind evolves the ability to produce extremely abstract concepts. Because at that point, the human mind develops the ability to come up with a concept or mental reality that defines physical reality as being the reality that is actually there where it appears to be. And that false and mistaken concept has some evolutionary utility because it causes human awarenesses to focus their attention on physical reality so they can learn to manipulate what human beings then mistakenly believe to be physical reality, even though what we are actually manipulating are relationally structured forms of our own formless reality. However, even though the concept that mistakenly defines physical reality as being the reality that is actually there has some evolutionary utility, that mistaken concept also comes with a significant downside, inasmuch as it throws a very large wrench into the experiential system. And the mistaken concept that defines physical reality as being the reality that is actually there throws a wrench into the experiential system because superimposing that false concept upon physical reality converts physical reality into a delusion, and so into a non transparent lens, and so into a wall that then obscures from individual human awarenesses the reality that is actually there, beyond the experiential appearances. And the reality that is actually there, but which is now being obscured by the misconceived physical appearance, is the non localized pole of our indivisible awareness duality. And that is the reality that we are actually moving in relation to as we direct our conscious intention toward any experiential reality, because experiential realities are just appearances and so are not realities that are actually there, no matter how much we may mistakenly believe otherwise. And the reality that we really are can't actually form a relation with a reality that only appears to be there, but can only actually ever form relations with itself, because it is the only reality that is ever actually there, as all other realities are just appearances that are created by, arise within, and are known by the formless awareness that is actually there where any experiential reality appears to be. And it is our in the moment relation of aligned or oppositional motion with that real reality, regardless of whether it is or is not being obscured by an experiential delusion, that produces what we become aware of as our in the moment emotional reality. In essence, the non localized pole of our individuality is like a large body of water that has a reflection on its surface, and that reflection is physical reality. And our localized awareness is a tiny portion of that large body of water that, as a result of flowing through and animating a fourth level relational structure, has formed a relation with that body of water and so is able to become aware of that body of water from a localized perspective. And if you're looking at a calm body of water and remain aware of the reflection that lies on its surface as a reflection, then you are able to remain simultaneously aware of both the reflection and the body of water. On the other hand, if while looking toward a calm body of water you become mistakenly aware of the reflection as being the reality that is actually there, then you are no longer able to be simultaneously aware of both the reflection and the body of water. Instead, you are left aware of only the reflection, which now, as a delusion, is obscuring from your awareness the body of water that is actually there, where the reflection only appears to be. That is how simple our present situation ultimately is. Experiential realities are just created appearances that we are converting through mistaken belief in their nature into delusions that then obscure from our localized awarenesses the non localized awareness that is actually there, where the experiential appearances only appear to be. And once that real reality has been obscured from our localized awareness by what are ultimately unreal experiential appearances, we are then aware of only the experiential appearances and not at all aware of our own formless reality. And that leaves our individual awarenesses effectively trapped in experiential cages, the bars or walls of which are composed of experiential appearances that we have, through mistaken belief in their nature, converted into reality obscuring and so self obscuring delusions. And at that point, we have no choice but to misidentify with some set of experiential appearances, so that we are then not just mistakenly aware of experiential realities as being realities that are actually there, but are also mistakenly aware of experiential realities as being realities that we really are. And that's when the shit really hits the fan, meaning that's when the experiential system really begins to malfunction. Because at that point, we begin to operate in the world and exercise our free will or conscious intention, not primarily according to emotional information, but primarily according to physical and mental information, and specifically according to how we conceive what we become aware of as physical reality to affect whatever set of experiential realities we mistakenly believe ourselves to be. More specifically, if we conceive any physical reality to enhance the set of experiential realities we mistakenly believe ourselves to be, we conceptually label that physical reality as good and automatically and unconsciously react toward it with a conscious intention of acceptance and allowing, and so generate a positive or better feeling emotion as a result. And that then causes the reality that we have mentally labeled as good to seem to be the cause or source of our better feeling or more positive emotional reality, since we are no longer conscious of the reality that we need to be aware of in order to be conscious of the movement of our own awareness that is actually producing what we are aware of as our emotional reality. On the other hand, if we conceive any physical reality to diminish the set of experiential realities we mistakenly believe ourselves to be, we conceptually label that physical reality as bad and automatically and unconsciously react toward it with a conscious intention of resistance and opposition, and so generate a negative or worse feeling emotion as a result. And that then causes the reality that we have mentally labeled as bad to seem to be the cause or source of our worst feeling or more negative emotional reality, since, once again, we are no longer conscious of the reality that we need to be aware of in order to be conscious of the movement of our own awareness that is actually producing what we are aware of as our emotional reality. And that is how converting experiential reality from a transparent lens into a delusion, and so into a wall that hides from our awareness or own reality, causes us to naturally do the unnatural, as that delusional situation then causes us to exercise our conscious intention in a way that generates a negative rather than positive emotion. Whenever we become aware of some experiential reality that seems to diminish whatever set of experiential realities we mistakenly believe ourselves to be while operating from within that delusion. Because even though the experiential system and setup remains the same, once we obscure from our individual awareness our own reality, our experiential situation becomes completely different and so causes the same experiential setup to function in a completely different way, and specifically causes it to function dysfunctionally rather than functionally, because we are then no longer able to exercise our conscious intention consciously in order to create the type of emotional reality that we naturally want to become aware of, but are instead only able to exercise our conscious intention unconsciously according to whether the reality we are directing our conscious intention toward appears to enhance or diminish the set of experiential realities we mistakenly believe ourselves to be, regardless of the emotional reality created as a result. Because once we obscure from our individual awareness our own reality, and so are left with no choice but to misidentify with some set of experiential realities, emotional reality no longer appears as information, but instead appears as something that just happens to us as a result of what we conceive as the goodness or badness of what we are aware of as physical and mental reality. And that's why we say so and so made me feel good or bad, or this or that made me feel good or bad, as if we had no choice in the matter. which we effectively don't while effectively trapped in an experiential delusion, and so while effectively forced to misidentify with and so mistakenly know ourselves as being some set of experiential realities that can be seemingly enhanced or diminished by other experiential realities, so that we then feel compelled to, and so seem to have no choice but to internally accept and allow that which seems to enhance what we mistakenly believe ourselves to be, and internally resist and oppose that which seems to diminish what we mistakenly believe ourselves to be. And that is why when good stuff happens, we feel good, and when bad stuff happens, we feel bad. Not because the good or bad stuff is actually making us feel good or bad, but only because, while effectively trapped in an experiential delusion where we have no choice but to misidentify with some set of experiential realities, we always exercise our conscious intention and so internally respond the same way to experiential realities according to whether they have been mentally labeled good or bad. And that's why so many people love watching sports, because it carries the possibility of getting an emotional high, even though it also carries the possibility of instead getting an emotional low. The thrill of victory, the agony of defeat. Here's how watching sports works. People identify with a particular team, and when their team wins or just scores a point, their experiential identity is enhanced, and they then automatically internally allow the experience and so generate a positive emotion. But when their team loses or just gives up a point, their experiential identity is instead diminished, and they then automatically internally resist the experience and so generate a negative emotion. But watching sports and feeling good or bad, depending on how the team that one identifies with does, is just a microcosm of how we live our lives while our individual awarenesses are effectively trapped within an experiential delusion, where we are effectively forced to identify with various experiential forms instead of being able to identify with the formless reality that we really are. And how we live our lives while our individual awarenesses are effectively trapped within an experiential delusion is through unconscious reactivity, reflexively allowing that which has been mentally labeled as being good, and reflexively resisting that which has been mentally labeled as being bad, and then feeling a positive or negative emotion as a result. And good and bad are just mental labels that we apply to experiential reality based upon our conditioning, which is to say, based upon whatever set of experiential realities we have used to create our form identity or ego. For example, if you're a Bears fan and the Bears lose, which seems to happen quite often these days, then that event is mentally labeled as bad, and you feel a negative emotion as a result. On the other hand, if you're a fan of one of the many teams that beat the Bears, then that same event is mentally labeled as good, and you feel a positive emotion as a result. And all the mental labels of good and bad that we apply to all of experiential reality are just as relative, because they all have as their basis whether we conceive those realities to enhance or diminish whatever set of experiential realities we have identified with and so mistakenly believe ourselves to be. Nothing is actually either good or bad, but as long as you believe something to be actually good or bad as a result of how it has been mentally labeled, you have no choice but to react toward it with allowing or resistance, respectively. And you have no choice but to automatically and compulsively label almost all experiential realities as good or bad as long as you remain effectively trapped in an experiential identity. Because while effectively trapped in an experiential identity, every other experience that you become aware of is compulsively analyzed and then conceptually labeled as good or bad according to whether it has been judged to enhance or diminish your experiential identity or ego. And your individual awareness will remain effectively trapped in an experiential identity for as long as it continues to unconsciously react toward experiential realities based on the mental labels of good or bad that have been automatically applied to those realities based on your particular experiential identity. And that's because, as I explained in some detail in the last video, unconscious reactivity is a secondary movement that locks or knots the localized awareness into the primary movement that is the basis of the secondary movement. And the primary movement is always an individual awareness's creation of and movement into the delusional reality or delusional identity. And the secondary movement is the unconscious reactivity toward experiential reality according to how experiential reality has been mentally labeled, and so according to how experiential reality appears to exist from within that delusional reality or delusional identity. It's a tangled mess, but take away the misidentification and all the unconscious reactivity goes away. And once the unconscious reactivity goes away, you are then free to exit the experiential delusion should you choose to do so. But to take away the misidentification, there first needs to be some awareness of the reality that's actually there. Because to take away the misidentification, your localized awareness needs a reality to identify with other than experiential reality, because you can't identify with a reality that you have no direct and immediate awareness of. It always comes back to this central conundrum. How do we escape the experiential delusion while operating from within that delusion, where our own reality is being obscured so that that delusion is all we know and so all we can respond to, and which responses then obligate us to keep operating from within that delusion? It's nearly impossible, given the self perpetuating nature of the delusional situation once it has been created and entered into. However, one way to throw a wrench into that self perpetuating delusional situation is to come across a true spiritual teacher, such as Eckhart Tolle, who, as a spiritual master, has the ability to direct the awareness of individuals who are receptive to his teaching beyond the experiential appearances and into the formless reality that is both actually there and what they really are. And spiritual masters are able to do that because being a spiritual master means that one is fully identified with that formless reality and no longer has any identification whatsoever with experiential reality, which then gives them the ability to guide other individuals toward the formless reality that they are continuously and fully aware of themselves as being. And all true spirituality throughout all of human history has had as its primary purpose getting human beings to project their mind trapped individual awarenesses beyond the experiential delusion and into the formless and so spirit like or spiritual reality that is both actually there and what they really are. However, don't be fooled or misled into thinking that the reality that is actually there is imaginary or unreal, just because trying to become aware of that reality has historically been the domain of the branch of human endeavor referred to as spirituality, and to a lesser degree, true religion. As true religion is just what happens when true spirituality gets converted over time into an endlessly proliferating set of beliefs and rules by people who are still trapped in the experiential delusion and so remain unaware of the real reality that the original spiritual master was trying to get them to notice. It's just called spirituality because it has to do with a formless and so intangible reality. And that formless and intangible reality is not unreal or imaginary, but is the only real reality there actually is, because all other realities are just created appearances and so unreal realities that real reality is itself creating and then becoming either accurately or inaccurately aware of. And when that formless real reality becomes inaccurately aware of the experiential appearances that it is itself creating by mistakenly believing them to be real realities, i.e., realities that are actually there, it obscures from its awareness its own reality, leaving itself in the situation in which we now find ourselves, knowing ourselves as what are only experiential appearances and suffering as a result, as we then naturally do the unnatural and direct our conscious intention in opposition to the conscious intention of our non localized self whenever we become aware of any experiential appearance that seems to diminish what we mistakenly believe ourselves to be. And so, what I'm trying to do is bring the formless reality that you really are to your attention by describing how that reality, through iterative and so progressive relation to itself, ends up creating what you, as an individualized and yet indivisible portion of that reality, are presently aware of as physical, mental, and emotional reality, in order to give you the opportunity to become aware that there is a reality that lies beyond the experiential appearances that you can become directly aware of, and that formless reality, as opposed to any experiential form, is what you really are. And I'm trying to bring that formless reality to your attention and into your awareness so that you have the opportunity to accurately identify with the reality that you really are. Because absent some direct awareness of that formless reality, you will have no choice but to continue to inaccurately misidentify with some set of experiential appearances that you really aren't, but only mistakenly believe yourself to be. And that continued misidentification will cause those experiential appearances to continue to function as a cage in which your individual awareness will continue to effectively and inadvertently trap itself, perhaps for your entire organic life, unless and until you develop the ability to direct the attention of your individual awareness, at least on occasion, beyond the experiential appearances and into the formless reality that is actually there, instead of having your conscious attention continuously directed and focused upon only the experiential appearances. There is no difficulty in being simultaneously aware of both a mirror and the reflection that lies within it, unless you make the mistake of believing the reflection, which is just a created appearance, to be the reality that is actually there, because that mistaken belief in the nature of the reflection obscures the mirror from your awareness, leaving you aware of only the created appearance and completely unaware of the reality in which that appearance arises and exists, even while looking right at it. And in the same way, there is no difficulty in being simultaneously aware of both the formless reality that you really are and the various experiential realities, unless you make the mistake of believing those experiential realities, which are just created appearances, to be realities that are actually there. Because that mistaken belief in the nature of the experiential realities obscures the formless reality that you really are from your awareness, leaving you aware of only the created experiential appearances and unaware of the uncreated reality in which those appearances arise and exist, even though you are that uncreated reality, because that uncreated reality is the formless awareness that is aware or conscious of any and all experiential appearances. And so all that is happening is that we are a formless reality that has misidentified with experiential forms that we, as that formless reality, are ourselves creating. And we always end up misidentifying with experiential forms because we always end up inadvertently obscuring our own formless reality from our individual awarenesses, because we always end up adopting the mistaken belief that the experiential realities in general and physical reality in particular are realities that are actually there, which then causes those created appearances to function as reality obscuring and so self obscuring delusions. And so, although the formless reality that we really are cannot itself be defined, but can only be known directly, the situation our formless reality has placed itself in can be defined, and so can be known conceptually, because that situation is the result of relations that our formless reality has become involved with itself, and those relations can be defined and so can be known conceptually. And all I'm doing in all of this is defining those relations step by step as they iteratively and so progressively take place, so that I can explain how those relations end up functioning as the basis of and eventually creating what we, as that formless reality, become aware of as experiential reality. And so please keep in mind, as I use all these different words to explain all those different relations, that all I am ever really doing is explaining some relation that the formless and fundamental reality that is actually there has become involved with itself. And relations of the formless and fundamental reality to itself can produce either a relational structure or an experiential appearance. But before the relations of the fundamental reality to itself can produce a physical or mental experiential appearance, those relations first have to produce a series of relational structures because, as I am going to describe in the next two parts of this four-part video, what we are aware of and refer to as physical and mental reality are created as the result of a transient structural relation that takes place between two relational structures, one of which must be functioning as a mind. And so I'll see you on the flip side.